Hi, Ben. Okay, what time does this 4:35 meeting start? 4:35. Call the meeting to order. We take a roll call vote, please.
For the Board of Aldermen, Alderman Fenton.
Here.
Denham. Here. Cooper.
Here.
Milton.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Howden.
Here.
LeBlanc.
Here.
Finance Committee roll call, Fenton.
Here.
Denham. LeBlanc. Yes. Milton.
Here.
Westfall. Yancey. Meenan. McConnell. Thank you.
Ralph, were you attending one meeting and not the other?
Something like that.
Oh, brother.
Ooh, you caught me in a daze there.
It's gonna be a long day, Ben. We're going to start off with overview of the City of Branson 2023 preliminary budget capital improvement plan presented by Ben Hart. Ben?
We are the city's, thank you, city's finance director, interim finance director. I say we because we've got several staff back in our office that actually do a lot of legwork for us. But today, what I'm going to do is just kind of give you an overview of the budget. And if you have any preliminary questions about the presentation, please ask them. There's certain things I'm going to go through fairly high level. October 6th is when we're going to really get into the dirt, the details. And we've got a lot, I think a lot in store just to kind of discuss, because there's a lot of good stuff going on in the city, especially for 2023. With that, though, I do want to thank all the directors and their staff in helping put this together. Anytime we needed something, we got it. And if we didn't get it, it was because they were still chewing on something back behind, and they let us know. So it's been a lot of fun working with these guys to put numbers together. And it wasn't a lot of explanation on our part. There was a lot of learning on our part about what they do. And it was a good conversation. I also, the packet you have was put together by Sunday Belili in the finance office. I wish I had another Sunday like her in our job, so it'd make it a lot easier putting books together. She made it look pretty good. But with that, I'll go ahead and jump into it. So the agenda for what I want to go through today is just kind of a brief overview of the funds, what they are, and kind of how they operate a little bit. I want to touch on the assumptions we used for the overall budget. Talk a little bit about the process we used because it's different than what you've seen in the past. A lot more involved. Not as much as I wished we had time for, but we had a lot of involvement. Then just some numbers overview. I want to touch on long-term outlooks for some of the operating funds. I want to look at the top revenues and what those look like, what they look like today, and what they could look like for the end of this year, for that matter. Department additions overview, actually, we're going to do that. I got to strike that one off. We're going to do that as part of the October 6th. I am going to go through the book, Joe, just kind of give you an idea what this, I say book, it's really a package. That one PDF that just got added, I want to just kind of go through that table of contents so you understand what is where. Kind of gives you a week and a half to kind of read through it, study it, because I know you'll do that every day, because it's that interesting. But just kind of give you an idea where everything is. We try to make it as simple as possible, at least for me, to continue to follow it. On the 6th, we'll be following that book religiously. That's how we're going to go through that. So everything that's in there is what we're going to kind of walk through. Then I do want to get some feedback from you about October 6th. I've got a preliminary agenda on a slide in here. If it looks good, that's the way we're going to operate. We'll move forward with that agenda, putting things together for you guys to review. And then at the end, we've got what the mayor calls big rock idea discussion. These are parts of the budget discussion that we've got a list, and if there's other things we need to add to it, we've got staff back in Kansas City listening to what I'm saying right now. So they'll be able to add that kind of stuff in as we want to see it. So that's kind of what I got for today. We'll jump right into it. So anytime you look at a budget, you're looking at really three buckets, kind of like your home budget or your business budget, right? You've got operations, anything that you need to be able to pull off a service or a product is in operations for that business cycle, if you will. And there's several funds that are in this operations. Now, transportation's a little odd because it's a combination, right? It's got people in it and it's got projects in it. General fund's one of the biggest operating funds in the city, followed right behind it with 620, the water and sewer, and then police and fire, public safety. The second bucket is capital. And with this budget, there's a bunch of capital included in this budget. And I enjoyed the way we did that too. We set itself up for success. And then debt, and we'll touch on debt on the 6th as well. But those are the three primary buckets. If anything you can take away, those are the buckets you're going to really look at and how we usually operate our budget. This is the accountant's required slide. I'm not going to make you an accountant, but if you pay attention to one thing and one thing only, the very top line says general fund. That's our operations. We spend a lot of time talking about operations. Here we're going to talk about police and fire as well, but we usually, anytime you look at an outside agency, whether it's a rating agency or whoever, they're going to ask, what's the general fund doing? What's your fund balance in the general fund? That's usually a benchmark for how the city's health is concerned. So we spend a lot of time on that. And then the very bottom one, enterprise funds, they're utilities. Obviously, they operate like a business, if you will, and just like a business. Depreciation, capital, accounts receivable, they get the whole 9 yards. Within the budget, we'll be talking about utilities as well. So we'll include this in the final book too, but this is really kind of giving an overview, or the public an overview of what the major revenues, major expenses are. And I actually lifted this out of your old book and put it right on this slide. So it exists already. I thought it was a good summary. So that's the overview of the fund types that we'll be looking at on the 6th. Some of the overarching assumptions to your biggest revenue sources, as you probably know, are sales tax and tourism tax. And with as many budgets as we do, I don't know that there's any client that actually has a thumb on what's going to happen in 23. Almost all of them have realized sales tax through the roof for 21, 22, and they're scared of 23. And everybody's going conservative. And I understand that with inflation and recession and everything going on in the economy, it's probably a smart move. Tourism tax, even more volatile, obviously, than sales tax. The sales tax, we did a 3% average, and it came out 4 to 6% in the last 5 years if you don't count 2020, 2021 as averages. Tourism tax, we got a 5% drop from 2022 estimate, and then a 1% increase long-term. My initial reaction to that was it's probably too big a drop. I'd rather have it too big a drop and react to a positive than having to pull back. So we've got that stuck in here, and you'll be able to see what that looks like to the overall picture. Then any of the other revenues, if it wasn't modified by a department, then it's usually 1 or 2% increase, nominal for that matter. Bulk of your costs are going to be personnel costs. Obviously, we're a people-driven industry or business. Compensation, we plugged in 5% across the board starting January 1st. Doesn't mean that's the way it's going to be applied. That's just the way we put the budget together. And for us, it's the more conservative way to do it. Fund it all, make a decision how we're going to move forward later. Health insurance, usually a 4-letter word in the cities anymore. Health insurance, we've stuck 15% in there. And this is in concert with talking to HR as well. Loggers, all the retirement, you can see the percentages that sit in there. Vacancies that are in the budget, people that aren't in positions that have been funded for 22, we kept them funded. And then since they're vacant, we funded it at a full family plan, healthcare plan. So that's considerably higher cost than if it was a single employee that we just didn't have that cost. So that should give us a little bit of margin as well. Non-personnel, and you'll see later, we received input from the departments and then plugged it in, and then any kind of growth would be according to what they feel that should be there. Fuel would be a big one, fuel and utilities. Also included in the budget, and really this is in the long term, some of these are in the long-term plan, the long-term forecast. Public safety building, obviously, and we've been talking about that for quite a while, the acquisition 2022. Then debt issue or renovation costs coming up either in 22 or 23. First payment on that would be 24, so that would be plugged in. Fire Station 4 construction in 2023, all cash funded there. And then staffing for the fire station is plugged in as well. Campground purchase and construction, in this case, there may be a lot of activity in 23, but the bulk of what starts for payment may be 24. But that gives us quite a bit. But in the long-term forecast, we've plugged in the revenues for that campground, along with any expense that would go with it. And then the ERP, that was a big one, the Enterprise Resource Program. That's actually an RFP that we've gotten proposals back already, so that's plugged in here for 22, 23. And those aren't easy to pull off, so obviously Chad and his staff and finance has got their work cut out for them. Staffing study forecast impact. As far as positions are concerned in the staffing study, we just from a conservative standpoint, we plugged everything in. From a worst case scenario, you hire everything, what's that do to your budget? Just to kind of give you an idea. That way we can back off. There will be a systematic process, obviously, of plugging positions in. But from a financial standpoint, we wanted to see what the impact was long-term with everything. It gives us the most freedom, the most range for our long-term forecast to know what our boundaries are. And they look good for that matter. Compensation study estimates are plugged in. I know our staff, Colby Krasnowski, you guys may have met him, worked really close with Kim in order to develop, recreate, if you will, a position master. So any position we have that's either funded, vacant, filled, we've got an idea of, an ID for those positions. And it's the Bible, if you will, according to who all's in the being paid in the city. Those are the overarching assumptions. Just a little bit about the process, and this is kind of a busy slide, but I do want to point out, we start our budgets with 22, roll them forward to 23, and then ask for input. That was huge, at least from my standpoint. I've always done that for 30 years. You ask for input. I'm not the one on the ground fighting the fire or chasing the bad guy or putting the streets together. Other people do that. So we need input from them on what that needs to look like. So we started just like the people, with their information. We stuck everything that they recommended, if you will, within those budgets. So you'll see that as well. So we reviewed any kind of revenue if it was specific to a department. We reviewed it with the directors. Non-personal line items, I kind of touched on that, and worked with HR. Number 5 is really a big one. Departments, we did I'm going to call it a retreat because it was lengthy discussion held in the municipal court hall or room. And unfortunately, I had COVID, so I was through the pipeline, and Colby was here. But we talked a lot about major increases, issues within the budget, issues within the department and the capital. And everybody was there, including their staff. It was a full room. And I think that conversation went really well. A lot of issues brought up and helped kind of concretize some of the issues we've got in here. Capital, we asked for departments' prioritization, just like I told you guys at the very beginning of this. We asked them to prioritize all their projects that they give us. So we turned them a little bit in a 2-dimension. We've got departments prioritizing them based on funds, and then we took a look at the city as a whole with those priorities within the fund. So for instance, Parks and Rec may be asking for something out of the general fund where IT is doing the same thing. So we have prioritization all the way down through there. And we're able to talk about what's available within each one of those funding sources, and that prioritization then allows us to go even further if that cash allows us to do that as additional projects come down. So in the package, you'll see that as well. And then I won't read the rest of those. You guys can do that.
Excuse me, Ben, before
Go
you
ahead.
move on, we may get asked the question that in the past, we've used priority-based budgeting,
Right.
which is a lengthy process, and the board and finance was all involved. And so what you just described looks like this is the steps that we actually use to replace the
Right.
previous priority-based budget. So when we're asked what happened to priority-based budgeting, you accomplished the same thing, with the difference that you sat with each department head, you sat with the staffs, you met with them one-on-one
Yeah.
to generate the priority-based budgeting.
Yeah. And I would term this as PBB light.
Yeah,
So you talk about priority-based budgeting, it takes a full 360 view of projects and then pulls that into a budget, which is, it's a fantastic process. And very few cities across the nation do that. This part is the light part. In fact, that not just everything was thrown against the wall to see if it sticks. There was a systematic process of what department directors went through in their own mind, what needs to be done first. And we actually had some of those conversations. Well, here's how far we can go. And from the weeks that they sent it to us and we sat down and talked to them, they may have pulled something that was an 8 back up to a 4 because of something happened. Yep. And that's the kind of give and take. And there's a justification or a reason behind all of it. So it really is relying on your experts to do to perform the service, and then you guys will be able to react to that. If there's something we're missing from your perspective that we need to include in that.
thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Budget overview. This is a high-level view of how I would measure the budget and what we really did when we went through it, the visions we were looking at when we go through numbers. And we tried to put that in pictorial format because the economists back that work for me want to put in pictures so I can see it. I can see it in a flash and see where we're headed. So I'm going to do the same thing with you guys. Citywide, all funds, forget the funds, all the revenues that come into the city. On the left-hand side is that pie, that big bucket. Obviously, almost half of that is city sales tax. Now, there's a little tweak to that, but city sales tax or some type of consumption tax, right? The rest are transfers in between funds. If you pull that out, then you're going to have sewer and intergovernmental that are going to be higher, obviously higher parts of the revenue. Intergovernmental should even get bigger as we apply for more grants, right? That's going to come in. But the overwhelming part of that is sales tax. Now, if you look at that light green part, on the right-hand side is the breakdown of that sales tax. The dark green is the actual sales tax. The tourism tax, you can see, is the 36%. That's that light gray. So over 75% of that number is consumption of some type, tourism or sales tax. And again, this is citywide. Forget the funds. This is just citywide revenues that come in. So what this does is really show you the link to the economy you have, obviously. As tourism goes down, so too does your revenue. As sales tax goes up, so too does your sales, or your sales go up, so too does your sales. New stores that come in and draw new revenue, that draws more sales tax to what you're doing. And there's a whole bunch of different factors that go into that. But this is to the core, this is the measure we look at on a regular basis. It just shows us what the volatility is. And it helps inform us on our outlook for the future years. If you're that heavy in sales tax, then we probably ought to be more conservative because a fluctuation could really mean something either drastic or really good to the forecast. If you look at the citywide revenues just by funds, and I showed you those, the biggest piece of this is the special revenue funds at 46 million. The general fund and debt and development funds are going to be followed right up number 2 with those. If you look at the special revenue funds, which really are revenue tied to a specific source, and they're legislated to be used only for those specific sources. So you have to use them for that. That's the revenue. So on the expense side, I've done the same thing. Special revenue funds here, you got 55 million, and the general fund at 23. Now, notice one thing on the 2 left bars, you got 22 in revenue and 46 in revenue for the special revenue funds. Well, Ben, you're overspending, aren't you?
Yep.
Not necessarily.
That was a trick.
You got reserves. So you've got reserves that are part of that resource in the state of Missouri, all across the nation. You count revenues and reserves as resources you have to apply toward projects and people or services. So what you've done is in the past, and again this year more than likely, you'll add to those reserves. As you add to those reserves, you allocate those to separate issues. A lot of them are allocated to projects this year. So that difference right there is used on projects. Instead of letting cash sit idle, you have a 30% fund balance. You hit that 30%, and then somewhere above that, you allocate it toward projects. That's what that's doing. So you're using savings account by still having enough in your savings account.
Ben, do you know how much of that special revenue fund is the safety sales tax?
Boy.
I'd guess about 11 million.
Yeah, so this does the same thing. This actually breaks that down. So,
Okay.
so ask your question one more time. I didn't hear all of it. Ask your question one more time.
How much of that is public safety sales
Yeah,
tax?
okay. So that's what I thought you said. So the special revenue funds, this is everything that you've got on the wall. This is exactly what those are. So convention center all the way to the transportation sales tax fund. The numbers 2 and 3 are public safety fire and public safety police. This is expenses. Revenues pretty much match expense. But that's your answer right there. The biggest part of it is tourism tax. And remember, it's one of the biggest revenues you've got coming in, so that's not a surprise.
Just to clarify.
Yeah,
So you're saying, so here where it shows public safety fire is 11 million in expenditures and 8 million.
in
Does that
expenses.
mean that the city's bringing in 19 million a year in
Yes,
public safety tax?
yeah, combined, right, combined. And it may not be sales tax, it's multiple revenue sources, right? The biggest one is gonna be sales tax. That fund, the public safety gets a pretty big transfer from the general fund. So it's the combination of both of those. Yeah,
Can you grab the wireless mic for me so we can stream the audio? Thank you very much.
Do we have that broken down? It's something that we've never seen. It was promised to our citizens of how much is coming in. I know the funds have been combined. That was how it was decided to be done a long time ago.
yeah.
But nowhere in here did I see anything that said, here is how much safety sales tax is coming in year over year, and here's how much is being spent, and here's how much is being supplemented.
You just made my decision even easier for what I'm gonna do the 6th. Not in this book is the 5-year forecast for all the operating funds. I think that would be a help, that would be a very good kickoff, if you will, on October 10th or 6th, to actually show you what you just asked. Because yes, we do have it, and we forecast those out 5 years. What I didn't want to do is jam more information in a packet that's already 152 pages long. I didn't know it was going to be that long, but it's still good information. So we'll bring that back on the 6th, definitely. You know, we've got them, I was looking at them today.
Ben, real quick, you're doing a great job of kind of being diplomatic. I think it's important for us to all know how we've done things in the past versus kind of how we're doing
Sure,
it
yeah,
in the future,
absolutely.
you know, and pointing those out. I think that's kind of what we're all interested in seeing. So when it comes to priority-based budgeting,
Yep.
when it comes to how we've used our reserves in the past as
Right.
opposed to just letting them pile up, you're giving us that information, but I think it's important, especially for some of us new folks, to
Absolutely.
say, how have we done in the past, how are we doing it now? So,
Absolutely. No, I totally respect that. And as you, like, that's the kind of questions that, how have we done this? I know we've, like you just asked, in the past, we haven't seen that. Well, I want to see it in the future. That's exactly what we want to hear. Because the tenets that we move forward with is inclusion and conversation with directors, with staff, for that matter. That's one of the things we wanted to do. Take their priorities, both people and projects, and line them up in the budget. Take a look at reserves, which is what everybody asked for. Take a look at reserves and see how much we can apply above that to projects or to people. And we didn't do that, you know, obviously, we didn't do that in vacuum. We go back to the directors. We go back and ask them what that reserve, what that prioritization level is. It's a lift under the hood, open the black box, if you will. Yeah, and there's in the past, I've lived in those black boxes. Nobody else wanted to see it. They just just do it to me and I'll move on to next year. It's not the way we did this one, but that's a good point. So that's the special revenue funds. If you look at all citywide, all funds expenditure just by category, obviously you're going to see very far left, 27 million, again, citywide. That's personal services. So it just proves that the biggest expenses we have are people and projects. That's going to be your big 800-pound gorillas. Everything else is what those people or those projects need to be able to do to make the service work. Transfers is a little bit of, transfers are from one fund to the next, so that's kind of a misnomer. The rest of them, you can kind of see what those big elements are. This is one of the more interesting processes that we've had discussions about back in our office. And it has to do with sales tax forecast and tourism tax forecast. I'm going to go through those just a little bit with you. What I've done here is show you what we would term the minimum, the median, and the maximum. And I hope I'm wrong on that maximum, and I'm wrong on the minimum for that matter. What we've got built into the budget and the 5-year forecast is at that minimum. And what that means is 2021, everything starts at 2021 and then differentiates based on where we think 23 is going to go. 22 is going to go, and then obviously 23. 22 is really a flat level from 21. We say we have 17 million coming in, flat level 1%. At a maximum, that's what I'm saying, we could potentially get. I don't think that's going to happen. The median takes a little bit of a more conservative role and actually notches that down a little bit, understanding inflation, understanding recession, understanding people stay home, and they might buy off the internet more than they do in a store. So that makes a difference. What we did, though, is on a true conservative basis, we plugged the budget in at that light green line, the minimum. What we feel like the minimum is concerned. And I was looking at it when I came in. 2023, that minimum, well, really we'll start with 22. 22's minimum, I think, is too low. I may be wrong. We still got 4 months to go, right? But in my mind, it's too low. We're closer to that mid-level or even the maximum at this point. Because if you take the rest of the months this year in sales tax and drop 2% off of it, we're still slightly over what it was last year. So we'd have to start losing sales for the rest of the year in order to match what we did last year. Having this approach kind of gives us an ability to kind of measure it and react based on what we feel like is going to happen. I show you this because as this moves, this is where discussions take place. If we feel like 23 is going to be better than what we forecasted, 12 months prior to that, like now, then we should be able to pull the trigger on projects and be able to put those in place as we move forward. It's the reverse of losing sales tax. You've got to start unplugging things. The opposite is true too. As revenue comes in, what priorities can you fund? And I know the department, the directors and I have had that conversation ad nauseum. There's plenty to do, obviously. So that's sales tax. When you look at sales tax, it really drives overall general fund, long-term fund balance. This graph makes me nervous. The only reason it makes me nervous is you can tell on the very far right-hand side, 27, 28, a typical graph, at least a long-term forecast, that's actually curving the other way. This is fund balance. So this is your reserve levels. If you plugged in all the revenue and all the expenses we've got today and 23 and then grew them for the next 4 years, that's what you come up with here, the differences. So what that reserve level looks like. The city's reserve policy is at that green line. We're well above that. Even now, we're well above that number. But when it comes to 26, 7, and 8, we usually see that go down. We're not adopting 26, 27, 28. We're adopting 23. But this does help us inform what those future years look like. This also is based on fully funding all the projects we've got plugged in and all the positions, knowing full well not all that's going to take place in 1 year. But it's got everything plugged in, so it's pretty conservative. That's the reserve. That's a big benchmark. For any fund you look at, that's going to be a big benchmark. And when we bring the 5-year forecast, I'll show you what those numbers look like. Mayor.
Ben, when I first saw this chart, I was struggling with it a little bit because what that shows is your dark green line is not our 20% minimum reserve, it's 30%.
30%, right.
And the lime green bars, that is showing that on top of our 30% reserves, that's the capital that we have, that we're projecting available.
Right, that's exactly right. That's a very good point. In 23, we've allocated capital. 24, 5, 6, and 7, we have not. This is purely based on operations, so you're exactly right. Capital is one time. So let's say in '24, sales tax take off, we could actually conceivably take $1 million out of that. This is the measure, the benchmark, right? You're at 30% reserve, and if we're sitting on another 30%, we're sitting at 60% reserve. You've got an ability to kind of use some of that money for projects. And what this doesn't do is plug estimated projects in. So this is only operations. You're exactly right, Mayor. That's a good point. So that is money used to be used for capital.
Ben, one of the questions I've asked over the last year and a half on the Finance Committee, if we keep doing that though, and the above the reserve amount, that always rolls into the reserve fund. It can only be used for certain things. So throughout the year, we're cutting pretty thin on the budget. And then we have these large numbers at the end of the year that just dump into this special reserve fund that we can only use for certain things. And admittedly, I'm not an expert on,
No,
on
You're headed
finances,
right where
but
I'm going, yeah.
it's just kind of frustrating to me that, you know, throughout a year, whether it's, you know, wages, like, we're not using the money as
Absolutely.
it's there, and then it's
Absolutely.
going into this other fund. Well, we can't use that reserve fund to go back to pay wages, as just as an example.
Yeah,
And so,
you're right, you're right.
is
You're
there
right,
a
you're
different way to
exactly
do
right.
this?
And what the plan is, and I'm just talking to finance staff and my staff at the same time, October, November, we're gonna remeasure what the general fund looks like, really all the funds look like. And what I don't wanna do is do the same thing as what you guys did last year, and that's what you're talking about. What I wanna do is, what I typically do as a practice, you take a look at the general fund, because it's the biggest fund, right? Take a look at that fund and see what the surplus or deficit looks like. In this case, we're surpluses across the nation on a lot of cities. Some aren't, most are, because they've under budgeted, right? They've cut from their budget and then didn't know what to do in '22, so they left it alone.
Right.
What I want to do is that sales tax comes in and we're forecasting a higher amount, let's say more than $500,000, which it could be, I mean, upwards of 1 or 2 million. We scrape that off, we come back to you guys with a budget amendment to scrape that off and stick it over in a savings account. We call that an internal service fund. We'll stick it in a savings account so we have it for those very things. We can allocate it later. We don't have to allocate it now. We can allocate it later.
When you guys are looking at this, though, is there, you know, looking at years past and projecting years forward, you know, is there any, and again, I'm just using round numbers here, but 22, it looks like there's going to end up being 9 million extra,
Yeah,
which means it was budgeted pretty low.
it'll be at a 9 million number, right? So, right, it was budgeted really low.
So my question is there a way to go back and look at the conservative budgets of the past and the projections going forward and say, instead of letting, you know, even 7 million, you know, could we take 20% of that, still be well above the 30%
yeah,
reserve?
Absolutely.
That's kind of the heart of my question there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that absolutely. Because that's what I was talking about at the beginning. Your reserves are resources, and that's what you're talking about. This is the resources. Anything above that green line becomes a resource in your current year for allocation. So we've only gone so far. We can go further, and that's part of what the discussion on the 6th is going to be.
Well, and I'll keep going back to wages, but it seems like, in my mind, if we say, okay, well, let's run a thin budget for 23, would it not be more difficult in 23 to do a budget amendment to come back in and adjust for wages versus saying, hey, going into 23, we can stand to maybe be a little more aggressive with the budget
right.
and look at wages? And that's just an
Oh, yeah,
example.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. That operations are the same. Obviously, operations, you got to look at the long-term impact, and we've got that mechanism set up to do that. But you're exactly right. And when we look at wages, we've got 5% plugged in with 100% of funding all positions, and we still have that left over.
Right.
Then that gives us an ability to go further, and HR to go further in applying whatever it is we want to, compensation adjustments, whatever the pay plan calls for, actually dig into that. And we usually work really close with HR to be able to do that. So we need X, Y, and Z type positions to come up. Usually it's police, because you can't find patrol officers anymore. And there's some type of either bump in salary or something to be able to attract, more employees. And you're not alone in doing that, but that gives us an ability to tap into that resource.
Thank you.
One quick thing, if it's okay, Mayor. And I guess this maybe would be a recommendation from me as on the Finance Committee to the board. Again, not to beat a dead horse with the public safety tax, but police and fire since 2017, I served on that board when that was passed. The intention of the board at the time was that the amount given from the general fund to police and fire was not to fall below that unless all departments fell below. It should have been set up differently in hindsight as a percentage of the budget for the percentage to stay the same, and then it would have increased and decreased accordingly. Are we looking at any of these surpluses? So they have held steady with their amount from general fund since 2017. So think about that. I would encourage
Absolutely.
the board to look at the other departments' budgets and see how much that has gone up incrementally every year. This
I
is a
swear I
great
didn't pay you to bring this
opportunity.
up, because I got an answer for her too. Yeah,
So I just think from a board level, this would be a phenomenal opportunity.
Absolutely.
To get those increases back up to
Yep.
where they should be and budget them into future years, year over year, where you still have your reserve.
Mm-hmm.
But if our community tells us on community surveys, year after year after year after year, that public safety is a priority, we've yet to make it a priority in our budget.
Absolutely.
So I would encourage this board to
Betsy?
take that seriously.
Absolutely.
Number one, Betsy, thank you for bringing that up. And to give you some assurances, we've already started those conversations to be able to fully fund that where it should have been.
The dip you see between 22 and 23, part of that's a $900,000 transfer over to public safety.
Did you hear that?
Split 45%, but it's 900,000 that goes over there.
We're only about 5 million off, but great start.
Hey, 1 million at a time.
Yeah, 1 million at a time, right. The other part of that plugged into the public safety fund on the police side is full debt service for the building, the public safety building. And I know I've already talked to the mayor, which makes total sense to allocate part of that, right? Allocate that to public safety purposes and non-public safety purposes. Right now, we've got it plugged all into the public safety, but that's another avenue where we can pull back out of the public safety, that expense, and allocate it differently to loosen some of those funds up. Okay, you'll see in this slide, because I didn't pay you to do this, it's the same slide on reserves, and you can see what this slide's doing. This is what I typically see. This is the one that makes the most sense to me on a 5-year forecast, because it's built on low revenues, it's built on high expenses, it's built in where public safety, the police department's paying all of the debt service cost, and they funded all of the building acquisition. You've got an ability to split that cost between public safety and non-public safety because of the previous slide. You've got cash sitting there, and we can do that. There's other projects that we can do the same thing with. Public safety is not the only one. We've got parks over there.
Yep.
That will need to reconstruct a campground that's going to bring more visitors in. That's just a revenue driver. It's not just campground. Now we're bringing people in for sales tax, tourism tax as well. Rising tide lifts all boats, right? But we can make those decisions. That's a good point. Now, also plugged into this is a 3% increase each year for that transfer from the general fund over to public safety. That's in the long-term forecast. And 3% was just something I plugged in there to get it started. What I did is go back and do exactly what you said. On the increases in each year that the general fund had, and they did, except for 1 year, obviously you lost everything. But except for that 1 year, it was around a 3% increase. But if there was an increase in the overall general fund budget, but I increased that transfer to see what that amount would look like. I added those up through 23, and that's the 900,000. So we'll be good as of 23. Moving forward, it makes total sense to be able to grow that. And for that matter, I don't think they could sustain themselves without that, because that's just the way that public safety sales tax was designed, right? So that was plugged into the long-term forecast. That way we've got a starting point next year. Costs go up again, we'll go up again. But at a minimum, they stop at 2017's budget, right? At a minimum, that's the farthest as low they go. Now, if there's another dip like we saw in 2020, it gives us a mechanism to use that for, to balance.
Like
Right, but in times like this, we should be able to, and naturally, those costs would have grown anyway had you not had public safety. So it makes total, and I didn't do that because I speed through town, I just did that on my own.
Excuse me, Ben. Number one, that really, what Betsy's point is, that really was the intent of the citizens when this was first set up. So I know there's many of us that are really glad you're addressing that.
Yep.
Does this graph show that replenishing the 900,000? Is that
Yes.
reflected in this? Okay.
That's in this.
Okay.
Yeah, that is in this. One of the other reasons this is declining so fast is because of that debt service is fully loaded into this fund. And to myself, I don't think that's how we're going to proceed. That starts in '24 and continues. To proceed, we're going to have to balance that public safety fund and pull the other part of that somewhere else. Because it's not in our best interest to have this continue to look like this.
And just for clarity, when you keep referring to that debt, you're referring to the White House acquisition,
Construction,
the construction,
Right.
and only a certain percentage of that is going to apply to public safety.
correct.
There's a percentage of it that is unused and it
Correct.
should not apply to public
Right.
safety. And even, and I don't know if you're going to go as far as the acquisition,
I would, yeah.
well, they don't need 11 acres, right?
Right,
For what they're
right,
doing.
yeah, right.
So separating that out, chief, of only charging public safety tax with the actual utility of that investment
Mm-hmm.
is what he's referring to.
Yep. Yeah, and I've started talking to them about that too, that same
good.
thing.
Okay,
Because there's 100 different ways to allocate
Yep,
that.
thank you.
And you
Mayor-
just pick one and move forward.
Ben, sorry, one more
No, go
question.
right ahead.
Does this include numbers from the department for police and fire of sort of all the staffing they think they're going to need or staffing that they've been told they can have?
For '23, it's everything, it's fully loaded with the staffing study and any request we had through the budget process is loaded in here for '23, as if they were hired January 1. And then that impact each of the next 5 years. So that's all in here. Now, for the non-personnel load items, we simply lifted out what they asked for and placed it in that budget. Not adjusting anything, just assuming that's what they need, let's go. The little stuff I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on because there's bigger things to but they know what they need, so we're going to plug it in there and go from there. Now, if we needed to renegotiate it and talk about decreases, we go right back to them. We don't need to do that, so I'd rather not do it.
Just a quick question to clarify. So if you split the cost out like you're talking about with the acquisition, would that drop the reserve line from climbing so much?
That's a good question. Yes. That's a good question. Right, because that reserve line is a percentage of expenses. So yeah, the expenses come down, that reserve line goes down. So you're right. The goal is to have 2028 where those two meet. That's the perfect place to be. Usually I see that 2028 number as a negative and have to manage to that, but you're in a really good position. That's a good question. And that applies to any of these that I'm looking at. So that's the police fund. There's a lot in there. We'll go through it in detail. And a lot of the assumptions, I've got a table that'll go through that for October 6th. The very first thing we'll do is go through that long-term forecast to wrap up this kind of conversation. We look at fire. I purposely used blue and red for obvious reasons. But the fire fund looks a little different. And the reason it looks different is you've got a fire apparatus that's only been funded, 4 or 5 years, is actually coming off. The debt service payment is ending. So you're going to see that increase. Also built into here is the firefighters, the 12 firefighters for Fire Station 4 is built into this. Built into this is the funding for Fire Station 2's renovation and another apparatus for Fire Station 4. So that's all built into this.
And that includes the additional fire truck.
Yes, yeah. And in the future years, just like the general fund treated capital, we're treating capital the same way. Anything above that green line is really where you're going to pull capital from. That you'll be managing to that. Just want to make sure the operations are going to fund themselves, and it looks like they are. As revenue goes up, obviously, we can allocate more to capital. And believe me, both departments have plenty of capital needs to move forward with. So that's fire. Tourism, so that takes care of sales tax funded items. Tourism tax, we did the same thing on tourism tax as we did with sales tax, only in my mind, we went a little deeper with 2022 and 2023's expectations. And again, we budgeted to the blue line. Well, yeah, we budgeted to the blue line, but in future years, we actually went deeper. The same thing, the blue line is the minimum, the mid of the black line is the mid, and then midpoint, and then the maximum is at the top. All three cases had a 2023 decrease. It was just a level of what that decrease looks like. I hope I'm wrong, and if we are, then great, we'll come back and start allocating that money. But that's what tourism tax, the forecast looks like for the out years in this case. Look at the tourism fund balance. I had to look at this twice. We had two other people looking at the same 5-year forecast. I couldn't believe this thing was at 15 million until one of our staff said, well, you just knocked off $9 million in debt. What do you expect? Which ended in 22.
Yeah.
That's 9 million that got freed up for projects. And then on top of that, you had another 2 million that was over revenue over budget, what we thought was going to happen in 21 and 22 for that matter. So that's money that hasn't been allocated. It's money that goes very straight to the reserve level. In this case, tourism fund is obviously 25% for marketing, 75% for infrastructure projects. And we split them, we split it the same way. But on the 75%, this is one where sales tax or this tourism tax comes in quicker than what we think. Then we're going back to Kendall and Keith and start talking more about what's there. And we could continue to push. And we've got a reserve there available to do just that. And we funded a lot in the tourism fund. You'll see that in the book. There's a page for 2023 funded projects. Everything on that page is funded projects out of separate funds. So that's the tourism fund.
And,
Yep.
and I don't want to get in the weeds here, and I don't know if it's in this slide or if it's in our next meeting.
Sure.
But in our numbers, Kendall, I believe we had 1.3 million or something for overlaying our roads.
1.2, yeah.
1.2. Yeah. I know these numbers look very, very healthy. I just wanted, as we're looking at this, I just wanted to remind everybody, a few years ago, Kendall gave the board a presentation. The question on the table was, what can we do to start repaving our neighborhood streets? Many of them look like quilts. And Kendall educated us after he did a preliminary study, Kendall and Keith together. And as I recall, the numbers were to replace our crumbling water sewer lines was going to be, give or take, $40 million. Kendall's acknowledging that's pretty close. And then after we've replaced the water and sewer lines, to repave is going to be another 30 million. So Kendall acknowledged that. So I know we're looking at these numbers. I just wanted to raise everybody's awareness that our long-term issues that we need to start taking bites out of is we're faced with a $70 million replacing water, sewer, and roads. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. Thank you.
Thank you, very good. I do want to point out, this fund balance is a little different. We included 8 million, 8.5 million in each one of those years, with the exception of 2023. We've got 12.6, 12.7 plugged in for projects. The 24, 5, 6, all that is just a plug of $8 million. It could be higher than that, could be lower. I just wanted to see what that looked like if we had something like that in there as a starting point for that matter. But thank you. Any other questions on tourism fund? I will jump into parks, one of my favorite areas. The Parks Fund, I'm doing something a little bit different here. The light green is the total revenue within parks, total revenue. The dark green bars are the programs and campground revenue. So you see that the bulk of that operation is funded by fees, funded by users, if you will. And The revenues go up, it's kind of hard to see here, but they go up slightly because of that campground coming in. That is a pretty big impact to the city. Once that does get rolling, that'll be a big positive impact.
Ben, for clarity though, the green bars, do those include the subsidy from the general fund?
Yes. Yeah.
Because
No,
that's-
right. The green bars do not. The light green area, it does. The green columns,
Yes.
the dark green columns are
So
only
the-
fees. They're only fees in campground. It's whatever you pay to actually use the
Okay.
service. What you're talking about is actually in the rest of that, the different.
Which is 800,000 million, right, Cindy?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, I just want to make clarity on that.
absolutely, yeah. And this just breaks down what those revenues look like. I mean, you see a bulk of it's going to be campground. And has a very popular amenity. Look at long-term forecasts for the Parks Fund, same thing. Same thing on this one is the fund balance is healthy all the way out to 2028. And as we have ups or downs, we'll be able to withstand those. They're probably one of their more complex operations because of all the programs they've got going on. It takes a lot of work on their staff part to actually build all this and then relay it over to us to put it in spreadsheets. So they did a phenomenal job helping us out there. Outstanding debt, I almost didn't put this in there, but some of it was surprising me, so I thought I'd bring it here for clarity's sake as well. The 101 is the general fund's number. Energy loan stops in 2023. That's money that's going to be freed up in 24. This is that fire truck, that blue, it stops in 24. That's that's 400,000 that gets added to the long-term forecast. That's another apparatus, if you will, or another truck that they're able to model in that forecast. And both police and fire have forecasts, 5-year forecasts. The intent is to be able to marry both of those up and continue to work with each other to make sure those things happen. And as an example, parks, they're pulling the trigger on and you'll see it later tonight, but they're pulling the trigger on golf carts that need to be replaced because they've got the money now. Just do it. Go get it done. Because you got $1 million rigs pulling in a campground. You want something to look nice that's going to help them or service them. So they're going to pull that trigger now. But same thing on police and fire. It should be in the same way. But that's the fire truck. That's one of the reasons that fire fund looks so good. When you look at this one was actually something inspired by Cherry when she come and talk about where does the debt all sit and when does it pay off. That's what this shows. A bulk of it's going to come off in 2029 to 2031 with the Branson Landing paying off. 2027's got a big spike in there for the Branson Hill shops. But what this does is just kind of show you what the next few years look like for amortization for each one of those pieces of debt. And we'll put this in the packet too, so it's reference material. Just another way to look at it is just by the numbers. Same thing, just numbers. And then outstanding debt by the numbers. So that's debt. That's debt, operations and debt. We haven't touched on capital yet. So if any questions that we haven't answered, feel free to ask them or stop me. So CIP 2022 to 2026. We almost got to the end and I realized that this isn't a 5-year CIP. We forgot to ask for 2027. So it's really a 4-year CIP. But next year we'll have that 5th year added on. But just a little bit about the process. We did the same thing. Look at a 5-year CIP is meant for a 5-year plan, not to redo it all over again, but a 5-year plan. So we asked departments what changed, what needs to get added, what needs to get deducted or prioritized. Big thing was prioritization. We wanted that prioritization because it's going to help us in the future. So we asked them to do that. They did all that. And then give our information back to us in spades. It was fantastic. The fund forecasts then were created and we started plugging projects in. And just seeing how far down the list we can go and what we need to recommend to you guys on the 6th. And that's pretty much the bulk of the process. When you look at the overall plan, by total, at least by area, you can see utilities and public works are going to be the bigger. Your infrastructure is going to be your big, heavy load, right? That's your above ground and below ground infrastructure. IT's got a fairly sizable piece in there because of the, mostly because of the ERP. But you can see the rest of them in there as well. But this kind of gives you an idea what areas those go for. And then by source, funding source, so these are the funds that these are plugged in. The only place that the 175, the 76 ECID shows up is in this chart. And I wanted to show it here because it's a significant part of your projects going forward within the city. Significant, and that's what I'm talking about. 22, 23, and 24 is going to be big. And we're in a position to pull that trigger and move forward. Parks and Recreation, well, I'm sorry, tourism and that by itself, along with transportation, are going to be your bigger ones, which, yeah, it makes total sense. $23.6 billion in projects. It's one of the biggest numbers I've ever seen in a government without being a sizable city. These are listed in your packet as far as what goes into these. And so you'll be able to see what projects are included in there. We also show you 24, 5, 6, the out years, and how they're plugged in. And notice Fund 240 Tourism at 12.6 million. We went right down the line, funded it. Because it's got the ability to do it and pay cash for it.
23 million in capital improvements for.
Challenge is get it all done in 1 year, right?
Yeah,
That's the challenge.
you're funding
They said
it.
they could do it, but we'll see.
Kendall and Keith said,
Oh, I
yeah,
know,
they said, bring it on.
Yeah. So you can
That,
see the bulk of the conversation on that Thursday is going to be about capital. And it also shows you the multiple funding sources that we're pulling from. What's not included in here are those savings account we put us off to the side. Those aren't included in here. These are only the ones that we routinely budget on a regular basis. So we move surplus over into a savings account for emergencies. Those are still off to the side.
okay, this begs the question. When you sat with the directors, either as a group or individually, did you ever say no?
Yeah, I ran out of time to continue to talk, so I just left.
I am overly impressed, overly impressed.
And I got to say that this is as a result of conservative budgeting over the last 2 years and pulling, 3 years really, and pulling triggers you guys needed to pull because you didn't know where the city was going to go. Nobody did, not just Branson, nobody. You guys are paired up with two different economically tied revenue sources as your biggest pies. And frankly, I'm surprised how sales tax has been rebounding for all cities. In fact, I got a retreat tomorrow with another city, and they're discussing the same thing. They came in at 500,000, which is your probably 2 million equivalent, 500,000 over revenue over their sales tax budget. So they got to figure out what project they're going to plug that in. But that's a result of a lot of decisions in the past. And maintaining those 5-year forecasts, which are critical to continue to plug this into the 5-year forecast and see what that does.
Those are absolutely critical, yeah.
And like I said, in the book, it'll go through each one of these projects and what they are. That is the numbers portion of what I've got for you today. I kind of want to go through the agenda after that, and then a little bit about the book. What I'm asking for your feedback, or even nod or nay, is just the basic agenda, which is what this is. The way I imagine that Thursday going, it's going to be a fairly significant day, at least for us and staff for that matter. I'll come back and give you a 5-year, I'm going to use the 5-year forecast as an overview, just to kind of give you more detail, what's in there and how does it work. I'm not going to make you accountants nor budget people. I just want to make sure you see how the operations work. I thought it was pretty neat the way the staff put it together. So we'll go through that. Then we're going to talk really about citywide issues, compensation, staffing study, what that looks like, how that moves forward. I know Jan's already working on health insurance. That may or may not need to be part of this discussion since we're already kind of headed down the road. But the big part of the conversation needs to be that number 3. department review, it changes. What I'm suggesting is operating additions and changes, capital improvement additions, and then any future challenges. I'm looking for them to really talk about 24 and 25. And if there's something in 24 and 25 that extends beyond that, we probably ought to talk about it. Let's get it on the record so we can continue. Because that, then what we're going to do is take notes and put that in a transmittal letter. That kind of discussion in a transmittal letter to put it in the budget. That way, when we do this next year, oh yeah, that's what they talked about. Here's what, we need to make sure we've got some of this addressed, and then continue. So that's going to be the biggest part of that. What I'd like to do is, and I've already warned Kendall, I'm going to have him go first, because he needs to go through utility rating model, right? And that's a big part of this, is going to be what he's got to look at. Then Public Works, and we'll go through police and fire. You've got some really exciting stuff going on that's going to make a difference, and I'm really glad to be part of it. But this is really the basic agenda. Now, other items that we've got included in as part of, we need to weave it into the discussion. Obviously, the water sewer rate model, hydraulic models. We talked about tourism tax reserves. We're going to talk about it a little more when I bring it back. Historic downtown improvement, phase 4 and 5. That's in the CIP. I can show those to you. And you guys, obviously, questions with that. We've got compliance with tourism tax. We've got some ideas there. Public safety sales tax. And we kind of talked about what we've included already as far as going back and back pay. General revenue obligations, what that looks like. And then big rocks, now in the future, what do we need to move forward with? And how do we want to tackle some of those? And then some of the other ones, tourism funds, the use tax and event bonds are still captured as part of our discussion. Some of these may need to get scheduled for first quarter for discussion, because I think some of it's going to require a discussion as we move forward, but we'll be able to at least plant a seed and start that now. Other things that, and I'm not going to read them all, but other things that are included in this discussion that we plan on including in the part of the discussion are these items. And I think that's all I got.
My initial response, Ben, is I'm confident I can speak for all of our directors, our city employees, and the community when I say we are so fortunate that you and your team have put your arms around this. The way you've presented it, I'll tell you, I am just overly impressed. Any board member want to share any thoughts on this presentation?
I just totally agree with you. That was impressive to see where we are or where we're headed, which is something I think we've been asking for a while. So that's a lot of work. Thank you.
Yeah. Chad, you want to pull up that table of contents for me? I've asked Chad to pull this up. I'm not going to go through the packet. I just want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page as what is in that package and how to go about looking at it. So if you want to scroll down.
Is number 6, before you scroll down, is number 6 an increase on that line item?
No.
Go ahead.
$11.
Couldn't help myself.
So what we've got here, obviously the long-term debt, you saw it, but we're going to include it in there anyway for the public. And then we've put in there, Sunday I had her put in the departments. There's a section for each department. So we've got what the department does, mostly for the public. Obviously, it's readable, not real long, a couple paragraphs, just what they do and what's included in it, right? What their revenue, not their revenues, what their expenses look like rolled up to major categories, and then what funds they stretch across. And some of them stretch across a lot of different funds. And then in the end, there's positions. Their current FTE list is in that same section as what FTE count looks like, and then their requests. And I'm trying to remember if we've got capitals in this book. I'm trying to remember if we separated it out by department. But if we don't, obviously we have it in another place. But each one of these, when you go from number 6 all the way down to 65, Those are the departments. And each one of them has, this is the full budget. Each one of them's got a section by themselves. And then fund summaries are really a rolled-up fund summaries. The detail, line item detail for all expenses are in page 96. And it's not just page, I mean, it goes a long way. So you can look up a lot of information in there. And then the capital improvement plan, all the years are included in this. The first page is going to be what the detail of that 26 million, that for previous number looks like, all the detail of what projects they are. And then in the back, just a reserve policy to tell the public, yes, there are reserve policies we have and we're following them. That's one of the benchmarks we use when we do budgets. So,
And I would like to remind everybody here and everybody listening, and Jason, word if you would share with the public, all this information will be on our website.
Absolutely.
So everything we've talked about, all these things we are talking about will all be available on our website.
And IT was gracious enough to take a few suggestions on that website to chunk it out differently.
Yep.
We've got a section only for budget, only for monthly reports, only for economic development reports. So it will be really easy to get to all this information.
Yeah, we'll follow Chad's lead on that.
Ben, I got a question real quick. Thank you for this presentation. It's amazing to see how good we're doing. To hit on what Cody talked about with being more aggressive on our budget, so you're saying, based on what you see, we would have the money to sustain being more competitive with our fire and police, with Springfield and other communities,
Right.
with no problem?
At this moment, I don't see how we have a problem.
Thank you.
One of the things that you will have as a tool, though, I mean, coming back on the 6th, we're going to show you what the projects look like and what's still left to be funded. You may collectively, as a group, decide, well, let's fund a couple more because we got to see these happening. Can we take these out of fund balance? What does that look like? So we funded as much as what I had time for, but there may be more, right, that need to surface or come up. And that's part of the reason we come back and give you this book. One, are you okay with what's been presented? And then two, what are we missing from your seat? That'll be a very important part of the conversation.
Well, if you don't mind, we have one more agenda item to cover. Ben, very, very appreciative. I look forward to the 6th.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ben.
Next agenda item is discussion about moving the three-man statue located at Liberty Plaza to the Branson Landing Boulevard at the roundabout. That question has come up a few times, and Keith is here to give us the answers.
Well, I can't hold a candle to that presentation, that's for sure. But to echo what you said, Mayor, about the budget and stuff, it's been great working with Ben this year and his staff and everything. So I think every director here would say that. It's been great.
Thanks for sharing that.
Anyway, here is what it looks like today there at Liberty Plaza. The three-man statue on the right over there, and then it's got the plaques for each section of the armed forces. Now, there wasn't anything said about, moving the plaques, because those are downtown, if you remember, down in the concrete before we started the project and stuff. But anyway, Chad, if you want to go to that next one, these are kind of some renderings we threw together with Photoshop and Adobe and some other stuff to try to give you an idea of what it's going to look like. Which it's kind of dwarfed by the flag pose, as you can see. But, to make a long story short in my presentation, pretty short and sweet here, to move it down there, pour a concrete pad and set a couple lights out there to shine on it and things like that, it's about $800 for material, not a lot. It'll take us probably a week to get the staff down there, dig the trenches for the conduit for the electric, and put the spotlights on it, and move it down there, pour the concrete, and it'll probably take a week. But that's very similar to what it would look like sitting down there. The only bad part, that I think, just personally, people want to take pictures with it, and you see people all the time at Liberty Plaza taking pictures with it. And down there, there's nowhere to park or anything like that, And then what do we do with the plaques? Do you want to put them in a future phase of downtown project, or leave them there, or, it's totally up to you all.
That kind of just gets swallowed up there, my first thought.
Yeah, there's room there for that 20-man staff.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
so
say,
I was thinking the
I was
same
gonna
thing.
say, can we get the big one over there? That would be impressive.
Hey, Keith,
Yes, sir.
so I got some calls this week about Liberty Plaza.
Okay.
Some people really advocating for it, quite frankly,
To leave it there? Or what?
It goes back to the fountains there. It goes back, I mean, is the genesis of this idea that it hasn't been maybe what we thought it was going to be, and so we want to kind of move it? Because here's the call that I got, and I mean, these are former aldermen, former mayor, is that when we got the Branson Landing years ago, there's positives and negatives to that. A lot of the positives, bringing in tourism, the shopping, it's amazing for Branson, right? Some of the negatives are you lose Mang Field, you lose some of the character of downtown, right? And so we talked about tonight what some of the great things that Cherry has brought up, and fountains have become kind of a buzzword here because of the money that we pay to maintain the fountains down at the landing, things like that. But the perspective that was brought to me and that I was asked to advocate for was that people downtown, when they look at the landing and they see everything that we advocate for, or that we allocate for down at the landing, and yet the downtown kind of gets left behind, and it's kind of a perfect example of that. Fountains at Liberty Plaza, not on. Now we want to move the statue down from Liberty Plaza. And so, I don't know, it just, I see where this is going, and it's not an initial thought that I had personally. It was just something I was asked to advocate for, of let's not forget Liberty Plaza. Let's not forget the intention of that and what it could be. I know that it maybe lost some steam at a time, but just what I was asked to bring up, so.
Yeah, we were advised, by previous administration to shut the fountain down at Liberty Plaza, and it's never been turned back on. To my knowledge, has it, Cindy? Yep.
Yeah, and thank you for raising that. And I've been hearing the opposite. I've been hearing that Liberty Plaza maybe hasn't lived up to what it was proposed to do, and it's an underutilized area, and very few people that come to Branson ever see Liberty Plaza. So I'm hearing from others in a different opinion.
I think I'd agree with that. I think the only way you'd really see that is if you stumbled upon it or parked there.
Or got lost.
I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
I just
for
parked
sure.
there a couple of nights ago when I went to the musical. I'm like, man, this is a really nice area
Yes,
right
it
here.
is.
And I kind of agree with that. I think what they were coming from, it's more kind of symbolic of like we allocate everything down at the landing and old downtown being kind of left behind. Is at least what I was hearing from these people, so. But I see what y'all are saying. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what you even do there. You park there and you go to the restrooms, but I mean, I don't know.
I've been through there just a few times in the last, couple months, and I haven't seen a car
Yeah.
parked in there. Another thought, Keith, is we probably want to maybe get with Ann McDowell and her team on 76 and ask them, because they're working on the creative right now for 76.
Right.
And if they have any future plans of veterans or patriotic or some things where they could see having this statue and maybe a few other things that we have included in their creative.
I think a Clay Cooper Theater billboard would look good there. Just a thought.
Couldn't afford the rent.
Just throwing it
But
out.
he was talking, Marshall was talking about, the downtown kind of getting left behind and stuff. So when we had previously looked at parking meters downtown, nobody wanted them. It was very evident. Cody and I met with them, Chuck did, and about got tarred and feathered, I think. But anyway, so I thought, well, let's see what the budget holds for 23. So I told Ben what we estimated the next phase of the project to cost, and he said there's well enough money in there to possibly fund that. So it's in the budget in the budget book. You'll see that come
Nice.
up as one of the items.
I mean, I think that's a good idea, but that's just my initial thought is, I mean, it just.
It almost looks embarrassing.
It's almost
Yeah.
like, let's throw something there just to say we like veterans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What about
It's
that?
almost like those toy little
That's
arm
what
that
it
I used
looks
to play
like,
with,
yeah.
like what I used to play with as a kid.
What, I mean, this
Take
may
a
be,
80-foot flagpole there and, you know,
Let's
four and
put
a
in
half foot
smaller
tall
flags.
statue. What's that?
Put in smaller flags. 3-foot
We can do
flagpoles,
that.
it'll look big.
so what is the story with our 20-man over there? Is that some kind of,
We don't have time to discuss that
We
now,
got a
but
12-man and a 50-man.
I mean, the big one, it's up on the
There by the
strip.
Veterans
Yeah.
Museum.
Yeah.
It's leased to them, to my knowledge. We have a contract with them, if I remember
But there again,
right.
I'm wondering, and I don't know this, I just wonder if the 76 Creative has a patriotic portion or something. Because I would love to see all three of these, well, one's very well featured. Maybe the other two, and see if 76 CID has a plan for that.
That's a good idea. We'll bring it up to Ann and talk with her about it for this, the next
Yeah.
phase that's under design right now.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, okay,
The design charrette is at the beginning of November.
Yeah.
Maybe we get past that and then we figure out.
right,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
okay.
Okay,
That's all I have.
Keith, we appreciate you. You're going to be busy.
Yeah,
Looking forward to it.
looking forward to it.
Okay, any other quick comments? If not, we'll adjourn, grab a quick snack. We snack before before this next meeting. Okay, thank you very much, Ben. I can't thank you enough. Look forward to future meetings. Do I need a motion? Yeah, we need a motion to adjourn the Board of Aldermen meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Did you get that, Lisa?
Marshall,
Marshall moved, Clay seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Need a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting. I'll make a motion. Is Ralph in this? We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Ayes have it. Thank you very much. We'll be back here in a few minutes.